I've known Simon quite a long time, but not as long as he's been practicing photography. So, Simon, I think it would be fair to say you have been professionally, commercially active in photography for about 40 years. Um, yeah, and almost 20 of that specializing in interiors photography from Simon's base in London, where he was previously. And he has helped in my practicing life. He photographed a project for me in Hampstead, and he was absolutely brilliant. And the photographs still look great, and he was just super to work with. He has during that period had a number of his projects that he's photographed placed in publications. So Grand Designs, Ideal Home, 25 Beautiful Homes, the Evening Standard, a number of publications. And so he will be speaking to you today about the steps you can take that might increase your chances of having that happen for you as well. He has changed career, he's pivoted, and he now specializes in retouching. So he does retouching of photographs, and he'll talk to you a little bit about that as well. So he is not speaking to you today from the position of still being an active photographer. He is going to give you all of the inside information that you need from the perspective of the interior designer. So Simon, I'm so thrilled to have you here. Thank you very much for giving us your time. And I'm going to hand over to you.
Hello, everybody. Julia, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Really appreciate that. And thank you all for coming to listen. I want to talk to you about getting the very most out of your photo shoot. It's, I know, a tricky thing to navigate when you're commissioning a photo shoot. And I want to take out some of the fears and the misunderstandings that might come up. Little bit about me. I obviously have had quite a longish career in photography. I've specialized in architectural and interior work. And I'm now, as Julia mentioned, offering retouching and optimization of pictures. So if you've had a photo shoot, you carried out a photo shoot, and you've got pictures that you want to have reworked or optimized, then I'd be really grateful if you get in touch with me. Anyway, Julia, if you could have the next slide, please. What we're going to cover today, how to choose a photographer, money matters, and the importance of coming up with a clear brief. I'd like to share some tips for harmonious photo shoot, getting the very most out of a photo shoot. Bits of advice which may seem not to have immediate relevance to photography, but have a huge amount of value when it comes to getting the very most out of a situation. We're going to talk about shooting your own content on set, generating your own content to use on your social media. Again, trying to make that shoot really valuable for you. We're going to tackle the big one, licensing and copyright, which I know can be a bit of a bugbear for people, and I hope to bring some clarity to that. We're also going to talk about trying to spread your pound and share shoot costs, make this a more commercially viable proposition by getting other parties on board to share the cost of a shoot. We're also going to look at getting featured in the press, a great way to publicize your projects, not without its pitfalls, difficulties, but it is possible. We'll also talk about the business of retouching, and finally going to wind up with how to display images on your website, because I still think the website in this day and age still has its place. And Julie, if we could have the next slide, please. So choosing a photographer. It would be nice if word of mouth operated, but it's a bit like possibly when somebody knows a really wonderful cleaner. They don't always share, they're not always that keen to share their details. So if you're on your own and you're approaching this, you may have to hit the search engines. Instagram, of course, is the big one. What I would say, when you're looking at a photographer's work, try to look beyond the subject matter. It's very unlikely that the photographer's going to have photographed something, a project that's exactly the same as yours. And if you can think about the how rather than the what, look at their style, look at the consistency of their imagery, of their, how do they cope with different situations? What's their lighting like? Is it dramatic or is it rather overly clear? There'll be a certain feeling that you get from this photographer's work that, you know, is it quietly confident and assured? Is there a consistency to it? Sorry, I'm just fiddling with my thumbnails here. If you can, do try to have a Zoom or even meet in person with your photographer, because it's just that there's no substitute really. It's a way of getting to know that photographer. And don't be afraid to contact them a long time before your project's ready. Photographers tend not to be so busy in January, February, March, particularly if they do quite a lot of architectural work because they really need the better weather. So it's a very good time to get in touch with them and just say, look, I've got this project that might be coming to fruition in June, July. Can we talk about it? And they will be, you know, more likely to be all ears. I talked about basically whittling down photographers you might be interested in on Instagram. Do go to their website as well, because the reason for this, you can see their images large scale, and it's a great way to gauge the quality. Instagram is a very small platform, and this actually can be a benefit to you later because it's not so critical technically. If you want to take a few pictures of your projects on your camera phone, then Instagram is somewhere where you can actually display them. Whereas a website, particularly if you've got a large desktop monitor, that's a good opportunity to look at their work big scale and be quite critical. It's a good opportunity to really establish the quality of their work. And this may sound a little bit obvious, but one question you might ask is, can you work alongside this person for a 9-hour shoot? To talk about chemistry would be a rather strong word, but it's got to be somebody that is fun, amenable, and serious as well about getting the results that are required. But there can be so many things involved in a photo shoot, like dealing with the owner, etc. Again, these are things that have very little to do with photography and everything to do with coming away with a decent set of images. So see what you can derive from their character from a Zoom chat or a meeting. Ask them about things that haven't got to do with photography. It's a bit like an interview, really. So look at their client list and testimonials page. That can be very useful. And again, I've made the slight assumption today that we're looking at residential interiors. You want somebody whose work broadly concurs with the subject that you want to shoot. Under the what I call the umbrella of shooting the built environment, photographers can shoot a wide number of subjects. They might be far more adept at shooting commercial premises like shops and offices. If you've got a commercial project, fantastic. But if you're specifically after a residential photographer, then obviously look for that to be reflected in their portfolio. Finally, see whether they include portraiture on their website. We're going to be talking about the whole role of portraits alongside your interiors photography. You may well need a photographer who is adept at photographing people as well as interiors. Alternatively, you might decide to split those two angles and have a photographer who really is, their specialty is environmental portraits for when you want to do that sort of work, versus somebody who's possibly a little more introvert and more into photographing, you know, just the straight interior space. So again, their website should sort of check that out. Julie, if we could have the next slide, please. Right, let's talk about money. And the first thing I want to talk about is the myth of the day rate. People say, how much is your day rate? I think I've got a project which is half day. Um, it really is quite misleading. So, for example, a photographer could take all day to photograph just a selection of rooms, or another photographer could come along in half a day and work considerably more quickly and give you a lot more images. So could I invite you to think, rather than thinking about a day rate, think more in terms about what sort of package of time and images you're going to receive. Is your photographer going to be there all day and give you 60 pictures? Or would you prefer a slightly more focused shoot on a select area? Perhaps you've just done an extension to a house and you think, well, we've got maybe about half a day here, but I nonetheless want fairly comprehensive coverage. I want maybe 25, 30 images. So try not to think about the day rate. It's better to go to a photographer and say, I've got this project to photograph. It's a medium-sized house. We've got 3 bedrooms, etc. We don't want to shoot the kitchen because I didn't have anything to do with that. And they will then be able to come up with a sort of a game plan and put a price on that. So it's like back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was taking photos in the late 80s, we were, of course, photographing on film. So we would charge a rate for our time. And then we'd also charge a client an additional cost for film, Polaroid tests, and processing and dispatch fees, all of which would, of course, mount up. Now, with the advent of digital, things were slightly turned on their head because photographers now become processing houses in their own right. So we have now got to do the color balancing, the processing, the dispatch of the images, which I maintain was the most wonderful thing ever to happen, because it was so exciting to be able to have that control over one's imagery. But what this does mean is that basically for every hour your photographer is working for you on set, they have another hour back behind the computer, tweaking images, adjusting, and making them look beautiful. And now this is different to retouching. They're not remedying problems. I'm talking about literally balancing out the light. They may produce a picture that's the result of a composite of several different images, and that takes time. And it's not unusual to spend between 20 minutes and up to half an hour just sorting out a nice, beautiful image. So that time does have to be accounted for. And also, when you do actually come to do a shoot, if you have got a fairly clear-cut brief, if you suddenly decide, well, could we photograph this as well? Could you just do a quick picture of the bedroom? That's quite tricky for a photographer to have to get their head around a sudden change of gear like that. So just please bear in mind that if they take a picture for you, they can't just give you a snap. They've got to put it through their own processing engine and treat it as though, would this shot be acceptable to a magazine editor, for example? Will it enlarge to A3 size of beautiful quality? Every single picture that passes through a photographer's studio has to, obey those criteria, really. So, bearing in mind that you will get a price which encompasses both the photographer's time and the time spent that they're going to be processing, you do need to know how much bang you're going to get for your buck. What sort of package is it going to be? Are you starting out, for example, and you actually do need quite a volume of shots? You need to be able to populate a social media feed. You'll probably be saying, well, look, once we get into a room and we've got all set up, could we do a few more different angles and a few details, little vignette shots that just give me that sort of volume? Alternatively, some photographers say, they can take an hour per room and they might produce 1 or 2 really beautiful pictures of that room. You may prefer to have that, and you then that set of 20 images that you have for a day's shoot forms the basis for an editorial submission. So you really need to decide and talk with your photographer about what you're after. And remember, you're the client here, and see how they can fit into that requirement. So I do say that when a photographer sets up in a room, there does seem to be quite a lot of messing about. They're often going to bring supplementary lighting. There's a lot of organization, which is why it can seem to be, the process can be rather slow. My feeling is that once you've got in a room and set up and you've tweaked it and styled it and you're ready to go, it's a pity just to emerge with one picture of that room. There is an opportunity to turn and take different angles. And so you can increase the yield, as it were. But please remember that the more shots that are taken on set, the more processing the photographer has to do. Now, some of you may have encountered this. One way photographer might work is to spend the day shooting, and then you'll then receive a list of proof images. That's just images that have had a very, very basic edit. And you'll then be invited to choose the ones that you want to see taken right the way through and given the 5-star treatment. And that might include a couple of retouching tweaks as well. And again, my feeling is that if you've produced these images on set and it's taken time and there they are, really, they should be processed right the way through. So when I was shooting, I tended to come up with sort of bands of images. So for example, I'd say, I can be on set for 6 hours and we'll emerge with about 35 to 40 images. Now, not all of those images will be full-blown room sets. There'll be some details amongst them as well. Details are quicker to shoot, but it just helps the communication beforehand, that you know that whatever you shoot on set is going to wind up as part of your portfolio. But I just bring this up, the processing time will need to be accounted for. Julie, if we could have the next slide, please. Okay, some tips for a harmonious photo shoot. Obviously, the brief is essential. The more specific you can be about that, the better. If you can, for example, if you're photographing an extension project, do you really need a photograph from the garden looking back of the extension? It turns into a slightly architectural shoot, and therefore that's weather dependent. That will make a big difference as to how long that shoot's going to take. Or is your shoot going to be completely focused, as it were, on the interiors? It's the more you can allow your photographer to know about beforehand, the better. Now, I'm going to contradict myself now, because with that brief in hand, there are those serendipitous moments that appear when you can see a really beautiful composition will just reveal itself. You didn't see it coming, the photographer didn't see it coming, but somehow, and in the moment, something comes up. It's really nice if your brief can enable that slight improvisation to take place. One hopes that it'll cut both ways, that your photographer will be equally flexible to say, this looks lovely, let's just do it. Which is why I think it's a shame if a photographer is literally, right, we agreed 10 pictures and here are your 10 pictures, etc. I think there's got to be a little bit of give and take on both sides. Getting additional help. Many hands make light work. Somebody once said that interiors photography is 10% photography and 90% moving furniture. So if you can get some helpers on the day, that's really going to make life easier all round. So there are two approaches. We're looking at decluttering and styling. Decluttering is obviously what you're going to remove from the set. It's not very skilled work, which is why if you've got a sort of friend that you want to bring along or another staff member, this is something you can do to help progress the shoot. And my advice is to be really quite ruthless. Take everything out that you're not sure about. Let's say there's a sort of display of shelves. Take everything off and put stuff back that is fully reflective of your vision for that project. Now, I hasten to add, do take a phone shot of the room before you do this, because it's rather difficult to remember where things are, need to go back at the end of the day. So the difference between decluttering and styling is what you then put into a shoot. Now, the question is, would you hire a stylist? Now, my feeling is that if you were, let's say you were a company that produced, I don't know, bathrooms or something like that, you might hire a stylist to come in and provide props for that shoot. As an interior designer, I would assume and hope that you have a very clear idea of what that room should look like, because it was your vision after all. So really, I would think that in many cases, you will function as the stylist, in that you will know what you want to include. So I have to bring this up. There is that problem of you do a wonderful design for a client, and then the owner's possessions start to accrue. And that particular painting that you weren't so sure about gets put on the wall, and the bright orange sofa is ordered in. Again, this is a time for big diplomacy. I have done shoots where we have literally removed sofas from rooms. I don't know what my client said to the homeowner to enable that, but he was very, very diplomatic. I think you can normally blame it on us, the photographers. Just say, look, we think it'll make a far better shot if we remove this, and it's just makes for a better angle, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, it is a question that you need to look at: is what is in this set? Is it me? Is it what I want to put out to a wider public as reflective of my design? So styling and decluttering, essential parts of it. I'm saying that you don't have to hire a professional stylist. A professional stylist will understandably have ideas of their own. If you can work with a stylist in that way, if you can collaborate, great. But I just think for this kind of work, the styling really is coming from the place of your expertise. Can we have the next slide, please, Julia? One thing that would be really helpful is to supply your photographer with a floor plan in advance, indicating north, and also the postcode of your property, because what they can do is they can check the sunlight path around the property. Now, it may sound rather strange, but wonderful, harsh sunlight is not always the best thing for interiors. It can lead to some very dense shadows and burnt out highlights. So what they can do is then come up with a game plan of how you work your way around the project. She might say that we've got to do the dining room at 10 o'clock before the sun moves around there. That will dictate a slight timetable for you. Now, if you can get to the shoot ahead of time, it's no bad thing to start prepping that first room ahead of the photographer's arrival. You'll just be able to make the very most of the time. And conversely, when you actually get going, photographers are obviously going to be spending time running, tweaking lights, etc. There's a certain amount of time when they won't actually need your presence. And during that time, you can be prepping the next room on the list, which is why it's good to have something of a sort of shooting order. Of course, once they get to the point where they're whittling down composition, they will need you then and there, which is why it's great if you can have a fellow worker with you in the other room prepping stuff to your direction. That's how you're going to spread your time the most effectively. A few boring things to consider, but they do happen. I've come across babies that are asleep in bedrooms upstairs, which means there's no way we're going to be able to photograph certain rooms at certain times of the day. Your homeowner could be working from home. They'll want to have meals at some point, or have a cup of coffee. If you want to photograph the kitchen, I do advise you to, if you can, photograph the kitchen first off. It's a big room which needs probably some of the most decluttering and styling. And it's great to get that done and out of the way. I've done shoots where we've shot the kitchen and the owners come in to make a cup of coffee and they've left a door very, very slightly ajar. I didn't notice, and that led to a huge amount of retouching further down the road. So it's just really navigating how you work with the people who are there. Children returning from school mid-afternoon, 3:30 is, this ideally you should be able to go on shooting till sort of 6 o'clock. How are you going to navigate that? Boring things like setting alarms. If your homeowner is happy to give you access to the house and they're not going to be there, then do you know how to access the Wi-Fi? It could be very useful. If you're working with a photographer who enables you to check compositions on a laptop or iPad at the same time, you'll need Wi-Fi access. Finally, flowers. It's my feeling again is that your design should really carry off a space. I don't think you need to spend vast amounts of money on flowers unless you're thinking of going down the editorial avenue. It's another thing to worry about. It's another thing to develop. It's another compositional element to work with. So I think the best advice I can give you is that less is more. A few little accents, like a few in a kitchen. It's quite nice to have a little small glass vase with a single flower in it, just something, or by a bedside, something like that. But big opulent displays. You're not selling a hotel, for example. It doesn't have to be over the top. Cleaners. It would be lovely if your homeowner was able to lay on a cleaner the day before the shoot, not the day itself. Sometimes homeowners think they're being frightfully helpful by getting a cleaner to turn up on the day of the shoot, and that really will slow you down. It's better if they can get the cleaner the day before, and then of course you'll be faced with having to do a few bits of tweaks in the kitchen, for example. And it's not essential to clean the windows. I know that sounds rather funny advice, but with interiors photography, the tendency is to allow the windows to burn out slightly so that people's attention is confined to the room itself rather than the view beyond. This isn't a real estate shoot. So if windows are a little bit grubby, that is not the end of the world. But either way, try and make sure that the owner hasn't scheduled to have tradespeople turn up on the day of the shoot. If you have got unfinished building works, that can be remedied with retouching further down the road. You might need to organize a homeowner portrait. This is particularly important, which we'll see when we look at submitting your projects to magazines. The homeowner will bring a feature to life, in which case you may well need to include a portrait. So I just throw that out, in which case you'll need to give them plenty of time to prep. Could we have the next slide, please, Julia? Now, we're going to look at shooting your own content on set. This is a great way to maximize the value of your visit. Do please have the conversation with your photographer beforehand. I think with the advent of camera phones, it has become a thing and expected that clients will want to record, at least in the form of B-roll video, today's shoot. It's a fantastic newsworthy item to put on your Instagram feed and say, this is what we're up to today. Stay tuned for the images when they're processed. And I think most photographers are going to understand that there will be additional photographers at work behind them. And I personally didn't find that a problem. What is important, though, is to just ask everybody on set if they're happy to appear in a video. The photographer might have their own assistant, digital assistant. If you want to do a sort of pan of the room, showing what's going on, then it's important to get their permission. Quick thing on video. I talked about doing a sort of pan of a room. My feeling is that video needs to see movement. So you might do something like You can photograph your helper's hands organizing props, or if you're photographing a kitchen sink, turn on the tap, have a bit of movement, or curtains blowing in the wind, something happening, or a staircase, you can have somebody walking up and down it. It just brings it to life rather than, so what I'm saying is, rather than panning your video around a room, why not keep the video still and have things move in the space? It's rather more satisfying when you're coming to watch it. So that's just shooting just sort of video to put on your social media. But shooting stills, the nice thing about stills is that you can actually get quite a lot of onward use out of them. You can use them on social media. You can use them to show clients, just in the form of a sort of mood board. I do feel that the still really still has a place to in this world. Leave the full room set shots to the photographer. They're going to be quite complicated to produce, particularly if they've got windows. You've probably noticed if you photograph a setup and there's a window there, your camera meter is going to get fooled by the brightness of the window and you're going to come out with a rather dark result. So look for simpler compositions. So we're looking at what we call details and vignettes. And details are just that. They're quite close up. There might be handles, cushions, taps, or artworks, just little elements of your style. Now, these details, they might not seem that important, but they actually say so much about your choices. We need the big, lovely pictures that the photographer is going to take that shows the entire room set. But those little accents that you spent so much time putting into a design plan, it's fun to have little details that remind people of the decisions that you're making. These are very much the elements of your style. Just one up from detail shots are vignettes. And vignettes just include a little bit more, slightly more of the room. So this image on the right hand side here, that would be more indicative of a vignette shot. We've got a corner of the sofa, the chair, and the picture. It's a sort of arrangement of objects. So Julie, if we could have the next slide, please. What I've done here is some details, examples of detail shots on the left and vignette shots on the right. So you'll see the details, they aren't ultra close up. We're still showing something of the context of the items, but the vignettes on the right, they're showing a little bit more of the room. Now, your photographer may well take these type of pictures as well as part of their brief. But I just want you to notice the difference between what they call a detail shot and a vignette. Now, what is common to both of these pictures, please, is don't go into the set and shoot from close up. You'll find that if you do that, your actual field of vision spreads a long way on either side, and you'll show a huge amount of the surroundings of the item that you're trying to isolate and highlight. And if you stand from further back and use your zoom lens or crop the image afterwards, you can actually pick out a selective item like this. So even these vignette shots, they're actually shot from quite far back. Now, the good thing about that is that while your photographer is getting on and doing their work, you don't have to enter the set and drive them mad in order to come away with a few pictures. You can take these sort of shots from a distance. And obviously, one thing you can do is when the set is breaking or the photographer is moving on to the next room, that's quite a useful time to, you can pick up these sort of shots before you break the set down. If we could have the next slide, please, Julia. So this triptych that I've done here, the top image, the landscape format image, is an example where you've got streaming daylight coming through the windows. That would be quite a difficult shot to take with an iPhone. Whereas the two below are slightly more selective. The one on the left is more of a detail shot, the one on the right more of a vignette. You'll notice that the detail shot and the vignette are portrait format, and I'm a big fan of portrait format. It works very well on Instagram. It's quite satisfying. Perhaps it goes back to magazines being in A4 proportions. Quick tip: when you're taking your shots, try to, if I demonstrate with my camera, I hope you can see me here, try and hold your elbows in and hold your camera nice and steady so that you can move sort of from the waist like a unit. You really want to hold your camera nice and steady, because when you're inside, it's actually quite easy to get slightly blurry pictures if you're just holding a camera out at arm's length. So keep the camera nice and steady, and you'll wind up with some better results. And avoid including windows in your shoot for that same reason. Finally, don't mix your pictures with those of the photographer if you're creating a carousel or a slideshow on Instagram, because this is not to do down your pictures, but they just won't be technically or stylistically similar to the ones produced by the photographer. And particularly if you're submitting your pictures to a magazine, don't mix the two then, because editors really do want to know that the pictures that they're getting can be enlarged big time to go into a magazine. Julie, if we could have the next slide, please. So let's move on to licensing and copyright. Keep a slight eye on the time here. This is one area that can lead to a certain amount of misunderstanding. So let's take copyright first. When you take a picture, doesn't matter where you are, you own that picture. So you could be at somebody's wedding and take a picture of them. You are the copyright holder of that image. End of. So when you take a photograph on a photo set, you still own that picture. By the same degree, the photographer owns the copyright for any picture that they take. Legally, it is theirs. And it may sound harsh, but just because you've commissioned this shoot, it doesn't mean that you own those images. So copyright in rare cases can be transferred from the creator to another party, but it's very rare, and it's highly unlikely that any professional photographer that you hire to photograph your projects will operate in that way. So how does it work? Well, the photographer issues you with a license to use. So a license enables you to use those images that they own in various contexts and for a certain amount of time. So a license has two aspects: territory or extent and duration. So territory are all, as I said, the contexts in which you're going to use those pictures. It could be your company website, it could be social media. You might want to produce a hard copy brochure. You might want to feature your work in a trade journal, and you might also want to feature your work in a consumer magazine. You want to be able to submit your images to an editor. All these areas are areas in which your pictures are performing for you. They're either working to market your services or to enhance your PR. There is value in each of those contexts, and photographers, when they come up with a license, they will be charging the value that's inherent in those different uses. Now, I really hear that you may feel, well, I've hired this photographer to take pictures of my project. Surely I own the pictures. You know, if I hire a plumber to install a bathroom, why is he coming and asking me for a fee every time I want to use a shower? And I'm afraid it's just the way the proverbial cookie crumbles. The licensing model has become established in photography, and photographers basically regard their photography not as just work that is produced for hire. It's a creative product which has intrinsic value in different contexts. The more valuable it is to a client, the more the value increases. Now, the way it works in practice is that a license will hopefully be fairly general and helpful to you. If a photographer was dealing with an advertising agency, then they might start getting into the real nitty gritty of saying, well, you can use it here, but you can't use it there, etc., etc. As a business, let's face it, you want to know that you've got more or less free rein to go out and use your pictures in different contexts without constantly having to go back to the photographer. So speaking for myself, my licenses would always be fairly broad. They would enable company website, social media, hard copy brochures. And in terms of duration, they would be for the lifetime of your company. So you wouldn't have to come back each year and renew the license. Now, of course, it will vary from photographer to photographer as to how they word their license, how they structure it. But I like to think that when they're photographing for businesses rather than advertising executives who are used to dealing with this licensing concept all the time, they will be a little more generous in about their time. If you've got any questions about licensing and copyright, do fire away. But if we could have the next slide, please. The one thing that a license will stipulate is that you cannot loan your images to a third party. So please be very careful of collaborations on Instagram, for example. You can't just enable other companies to repost your images in their feed unless they have an arrangement with the photographer to use those images as well. And again, this may sound a little frustrating to you, but in theory, any company or organization who's going to make use of those images that the photographer has produced are somehow deriving financial benefit. And that will include a magazine. If a magazine publishes your pictures, they're getting advertising revenue in, they're selling subscriptions to the magazine. So sometimes it's kind of helpful to think of it in musical terms. A music artist doesn't go and turn up and sing a song and record it and get paid a flat fee. Every time that song is released in a different format, there is a license fee payable to the musician. So it's just a way of thinking of these images as a source of value. So conversely, a photographer can't just go off and issue licenses to other companies without coming to you, because after all, this subject matter is your intellectual property. You know, your interiors project is your work. That's your creation. So it has to work both ways. A photographer might say, listen, I think we can we can sell some pictures to a brand that you've used. It might be a sort of a tiling company, and perhaps you can have a sort of agreed arrangement to sell pictures on to other companies and recoup some of your investment in the photography itself. So this can work to your benefit. As I said, there is an exception to the whole licensing and copyright model, is when photographers produce work under what they call work made for hire arrangement. And the copyright isn't retained by the photographer, but this would be events photography or some forms of real estate work. It won't be the sort of photography that you're commissioning. Now, another benefit of the whole licensing and copyright system is that precisely because your photographer retains the copyright, it means that if some unscrupulous person downloads the images from your website and uses them on their own website or Instagram feed, passing them off as their own, your photographer has a vested interest in pursuing that infringement or unauthorized usage. If they've handed over the copyright and been paid, there's nothing in it for them to pursue that infringement. So the fact that they do hang on to the copyright and issue a license actually protects your intellectual property at the same time. I quickly want to just bring up property and model release forms, two other sort of legal documents that you'll hear banded about that are important to get clear at the time of shoot. A property release form is simply a form which you will ask your homeowner to sign that says, yes, you can use images of my house and by extension, pets and children and people. That's the model aspect of it. in whatever context you like, i.e. online, in print, etc., etc. It's something your photographer should be organizing independently, because they want to be very careful that they've got sign off from anybody who appears in those pictures, to without it's a tricky issue. You don't want to photograph somebody's house and then find that they say, oh well, I didn't actually want it to be featured in the press. It's a conversation to have with the homeowner first of all, and get that clear. And I just throw something out quickly. If you let's say you do your shoot and your homeowner says, great, do whatever you want with the pictures, wonderful, and then 2 years later they sell their house and a new owner moves in and they open a magazine and they see pictures of their house, that could be potentially rather uncomfortable. So I would advise you to get a property release signed by the homeowner, and to ask them, if they do happen to sell their house, to make sure that the next owners know that a photo shoot has taken place and that pictures are liable to be online or in a published context. Can we have the next slide, please, Julia? Right, sharing shoot costs. I'm sure those of you who've looked into this subject know that it is not a cheap business, sadly, getting your projects photographed. So I'm hoping to show now how there are ways to bring that total cost down. Most photographers will be amenable to this, but there will be other parties involved in your project who I'm sure would be delighted to have access to some of the pictures. So if you think about an architect you might have collaborated with, or a bespoke joinery supplier, or people who just provided the lighting, suppliers, brands that you used. All of these people, they need imagery to publicize their services and products. And wouldn't it be nice for your homeowner if you were to have one master photo shoot in which you covered all these bases, and they didn't have to have several follow-on photo shoots? That said, there are a lot of companies, small companies like joiners or contractors you might have used, who really have not got the budget for a photo shoot, but they'd be more than happy to chip in if they thought they were going to get usage from some of the pictures from your shoot. So going back to the licensing principle, your photographer can issue supplementary licenses to other companies who want to use images in their own marketing, with your agreement, of course. But because theoretically that company is, those additional companies are making, deriving value from the photographer's pictures, a fee will apply. Now, bear with me on this. Let's throw out, it could be 25% of what they call your creative or production fee, whatever the photographer was going to charge for one user of the images, yourself, maybe 25% of that. Now, let's say, if you look at the table on the right, let's say that the shoot was £600. Let's say it's like a sort of a 4 or 5 hour shoot. It's not a huge project. The bill is going to be £600 for you to use the images in various contexts. If you bring another player on board, like the architect, a photographer will add 25% of the fee, which is £150. That's going to bring it to £750. But on a 50-50 split, that takes us down to £375 each, which is actually a 37.5% saving. Now, if you add additional parties, the numbers get even better. So you could be looking at £1,000 full day shoot, shared between 3 participants, is really starting to become a lot more manageable. There is, of course, a fly in the ointment. You've got to be very careful who you choose to share those shoot costs with. And Julie, if we could have the next slide, please. Because there can be a very different approach to a photo shoot by different clients. Let's take the example of, let's say you're working alongside a property developer who wants to sell this project. Now, you do need to distinguish between what I call property marketing photography and photography that's going to be useful to you as an interior designer. And this shot at the top of the page here is an example of what I call typical real estate photography. It's very wide angle. It's quite obviously lit. It's showing the big picture. Property marketing photography is trying to sell the property itself, whereas a photograph for your portfolio is trying to sell or promote your vision, your style, what you did for that project. So the picture below is actually of the same room, but shot the other way. So that's, you can see the sofa, that's shot from much further back. So there's less distortion. It's less wide angle. It's less greedy somehow. We're not trying to say a huge amount as the top picture shows. We're square onto the back wall, which helps to reduce the distortion. And the light is slightly moodier. You know, I want to see some texture there in the fabrics. There's no, I don't feel the onus to light it up like a Christmas tree. Whereas for property marketing, you really would. Now, why does this matter when it comes to sharing shoot costs? Well, there can be a discrepancy between the brief that one client wants to see or the photographs that they want to emerge with and what you want to emerge with. So let's throw out another example, a kitchen company. They could spend the best part of a day photographing a kitchen. And it may well be that that is one shoot that you just have to say to your owner, look, the kitchen company is going to come and do their own shoot. Maybe you could have an arrangement with them to license images and vice versa. If they wanted to do a feature about the kitchen and show some of the rooms from the rest of the house to put it in context, then that's a collaboration you can do. But a kitchen shoot is very, very specific. However, let's put this more positively. Somebody like a bespoke, a joiner who's done bespoke joinery, or people who provided fabrics, curtains, etc., they're all going to be delighted to have some images, and one would hope that they'll enable you to be the main commissioning client and to get on with the shoot, and they're happy to have pictures at the end of the day. Now, it could be and that the photographer asks you to foot the bill for the entire shoot, which I know is a little bit nerve-wracking. You've agreed to these additional percentages for each player. That can be a little tricky if you have clients or collaborators who say, well, I only wanted to see pictures of my input. If that's the case, then you're going to have to come up with a sort of sliding scale of percentages of how you agree to share the prices between the various players. So the photographer might agree to issue split invoices to each different player, but you'll have to advise them on what percentage basis that has to be done. So don't forget, you're going to pay a percentage for each additional player. So let's say that brings the bill up to £1,500. You will then need to decide how that £1,500 is going to be spread across the different participants. But please don't give up on the idea of sharing shoot costs, because it can be done. You can find the sort of people who are happy to enable this. And it can be a way of really, really reducing your costs. Can we have the next slide, please, Julia? So if you are going to do the shoot sharing process, it'd be really great not to invite other parties to the shoot. A photographer really needs to know that he's working with one main commissioning client. It'd be nice if you have the conversation with those people who you're sharing the costs with aside and come to the photographer with a combined brief. Now, this may be that you need to shoot more shots to cover all bases. And it could well spill over into a 2-day shoot. I have done quite a lot of 2-day shoots. I know that's a bit of a burden for the owner, but if it's in the interests of getting all these players to be able to make the most of the imagery, then it kind of makes economic sense. As I said, just after the shoot, have a chat with your photographer about other parties you might be able to market your pictures to, like brands that you've used, the lighting company, for example. they may be very excited to purchase a couple of images. And I don't think it's unreasonable to talk with your photographer about sharing the possible profits from licensing images onwards to those sort of companies. One thing to be careful of, something that's come out quite a lot nowadays, is homeowners are increasingly offering Airbnb for their homes. And they're also getting into the TV and film locations hire business. And they may well ask, look, can we borrow or use some of the pictures on a locations hire site so that we can try and make some money out from that aspect? Please talk to your photographer about that, because theoretically the locations hire company is another party, and be prepared that they may well ask for that party to pay a sort of a license fee for that. Come on, next slide, please, Julia. Right, getting featured in the press. As I said, in this increasingly online world, I do feel that hard copy media still has a role to play. If you get your project featured in the press, what does that mean? It means that an editor who has got 100 unsolicited projects on their desk decides that your project is the one that they want to run a 6, 7, 8 page spread in a national consumer magazine. There is no better testimonial than that in my mind. It's a fantastic advertisement, and it's free. It really is. You know, it's something to be chased, I think, and make a noise about it on social media. It really is a fantastic testimonial. Bear in mind that your own home is your greatest asset in this respect, for reasons that have become clear, because you can call the shots. For other homes that you've worked on and that you think have a sort of a possibility of getting covered in a magazine, there are things that you do need to consider. First and foremost, an editorial feature cannot look like an obvious advert for your services. First and foremost, it has to be a story about a real home with a real owner who has interests and tastes of their own. And the story there is that they came to you as an interior designer to transform their house. So it's still an advertorial, well, a promotion of your work. And one would hope that thanks to your journalist, you get a very good soundbite and quote in the copy. And there's plenty of good mention of your services and a link to your website. But magazines, first and foremost, they're addressing an audience, and they need to come up with interesting stories for the audience. So this is going to put quite an onus on your homeowner. We will need them to take part. This is why I'm saying that for your first foray into this world, if you can make your own home perform that function, then it's killing two birds with one stone. So for this reason, holiday lets are an absolute no-no. They just haven't got enough personality to them for an editor to be able to really work with them. It's not going to happen for holiday lets. I'm afraid it's almost editorial policy not to agree to them. So it's got to be a real home. Can we have the next slide, please, Julia? So having said that, magazines are really interested in the story of the homeowner. They will often want a portrait. And I'm afraid this can be a big no-no. You know, some people just say, look, I'm completely allergic to appearing in front of the camera. I don't want it. You know, it's just not going to happen. Not every magazine insists on this. So I'll talk a little bit later about enlisting the help of a journalist. If you can't get the homeowner to agree to appear in a portrait, don't worry. There will be options. It will make it slightly more saleable as a feature if you do. And I've got a couple of examples here of homeowner portraits. If your homeowner is a little bit shy, you can start them off with a soft sell and say, well, let's go for the image, the sort of image on the right, more of a lifestyle image of you in the space, perhaps reading a book. You know, you're not looking directly at the camera, rather than the image on the left, which is somebody who is much more confident and quite happy to do the sort of cheesy grin towards the camera. Again, some magazines won't even want the type of picture on the left. They'll far prefer the one on the right. But if your homeowner is a little bit cautious, then you could show them those sort of examples, and your photographer ought to be able to help out in that respect. One thing that's really important is to only approach one magazine at a time. There is nothing worse if an editor gets excited about publishing your project, only to find that it's on the books with another editor who's had the same idea. And that's the quickest way to get blacklisted, I'm afraid, in that world. So it may be very frustrating. Magazines can take forever to get back to you, but please target one magazine. So look, if it's really important for me to get into Ideal Home or Country Living or whatever, approach that editor first. Now, any feature that I've managed to have appear has been the result of the hard work of a journalist. I've collaborated with journalists in the past, and I strongly advise you to do similar. They have got a fantastic understanding of what the market wants. They'll be able to look at your project and say, well, I think this is material for 25 beautiful homes, or maybe it's going to be better in real homes. They'll know where to place it, and they can save you a lot of time. They've also got, in many cases, a good track record with the editors, so they can hopefully get an answer quicker than if you were submitting unsolicited presentations to editors. It really is worth doing. You can also have the conversation with the journalist about ensuring that the copy includes a jolly good plug for your own services. I say that unashamedly. Let's face it, this is what you want at the end of the day. You want it, the message to come across that this project was your transformation. So don't be disheartened by the no's. Editors have a lot to choose from. If you don't make the grade, it's not a reflection on your project in terms of its merits. It's just, they may be doing something different that month. As a slight fallback, again, another good reason for staying in touch with journalists, magazines often throw out a sort of a call each month, and they say, listen, we've got a group article on staircases coming up. So let's, if you've got any images of staircases, we're interested in seeing them. And those sort of group articles don't require a homeowner portrait, and they don't they're not nosy about the homeowner's circumstances. So that can be a good way of at least getting some sort of coverage in the press. I doubt whether this is applicable here, but if you are submitting your projects to a building magazine, a lot of building magazines want to know the costs of the build. And again, that can be sometimes homeowners just simply do not want to divulge those sort of costs. It's a tricky one. Sometimes people are really proud of what they've done and they're happy to say, yes, we spent XYZ on soft furnishings. If they don't want to do that, you can't force them, obviously, but it does mean that some of those sort of build titles won't be an option for you. But I would feel that you're more interested in targeting titles that are more into decor and design. They're going to be a better platform for you. Can we have the next slide, please, Julia? If you're thinking of getting any kind of editorial exposure, do please have the conversation with your photographer. Some photographers already collaborate with journalists, and they may have a great game plan for this project, and it might be easier just to let them get on and do that. We talked about licensing earlier. Theoretically, a magazine is another user of your pictures, and for a while at least, editors would always remunerate a photographer for a set of pictures. So the world is changing slightly. A lot of editors are often coming directly to you as interior designers saying, what have you got in your books? Have you got an interesting editorial project? And expecting to be able to use those pictures without further cost to themselves. So I have to bring this up. It may be that you agree with your photographer a flat fee to just enable you to promote your pictures to editorial titles. And that then covers the fee that they might have had if the magazine had remunerated them. Either way, do have the conversation. There is a sting in the tail with this whole editorial thing, is that you have to be very, very, very careful about using your images online before the publication date in a magazine. This is another reason for shooting some of your own pictures at the same time as the main photographic set, because you can use some of your own pictures as little tasters on Instagram to just say, stay tuned to see this, you know, some interesting developments in connection with this project. For now, here are a few little sneak peeks. You'll want to keep your photographer's images off Instagram. And again, if you've done an arrangement with other clients, other participants in the shoot to share the costs, you'll all have to be on the same page on this. I know that's probably what you won't want to hear this, but you could be looking at a 6-month delay while the magazine, you know, before the magazine says yes, you can publicize pictures on your own platforms. So really, you have to ask the question: what is the value of this editorial exposure such that I'm going to put my marketing on hold while we wait? Some magazines won't be so fussy. They'll understand that the world goes on spinning. They'll say, look, use a few pictures on your website, but don't flood Instagram with them. They still understandably want to know that they're getting some sort of exclusive rights to these images. Just quickly talk about first and second rights. A magazine, as I said, will insist on an exclusivity period when they publish your feature, and that might be 6 months or a year. And then after that period, you're then free to submit your pictures to another magazine, and that's what's known as second rights. The other magazine will need to know that you've already been published in one title. So, for example, you might be able to get the London Evening Standard as a second rights basis. It only goes out one evening, but it's a very useful bit of exposure. I did a lot of shoots for the London Evening Standard in my time, and it was almost as valuable getting featured for one evening there as it was getting in some national magazines. Magazines, more local magazines like Cotswold Life, Surrey Life, they're all very happy to take features that are slightly sort of reworded or dressed up in a different guise on a second rights basis, particularly if there's a different angle that they can take them in. Just make sure that anybody that you're sharing costs with knows about the arrangement you've got in place. Make sure that they're not approaching magazine titles at the same time, which is another reason for, if your photographer really is adamant about taking care of the editorial side of things, at least you know that it's happening there. Can we have the next slide, please, Julia? Right, a quick thing on retouching. You've had your photograph of your photo shoots carried out, all well and good. Obviously, if there are things that need to be changed, it's better to do it on set. But sometimes there are things that, little gremlins that just really detract from your shoot. Smoke alarms, some sockets, wear and tear marks or damage to fabrics, things you can't change on set. That's where retouching comes in. It's for fixing problems. So down here, I've got one of those carpets that just would not behave. And that's a retouching job. Optimization is rather more different. That's about sorting out issues with quality. Now, the picture on the right, these were actually taken by an interior designer of a skiing chalet. And sadly, the budget wasn't there to have a photo shoot. So she actually took some very competent pictures purely with an iPhone. But the shot at the top is a classic example of the meter getting fooled and it turning out very dark. So the one below has just had an optimization treatment. I've selectively gone in and lightened various areas and warmed up some areas and cooled down others. That's optimization. It's that's the sort of thing that might be applied to shots that you shoot on set, and you just want to have tweaked slightly before you send them out to a wider audience. And I would say we are being judged all the time. I mean, your social media, if you put pictures on there, it is a case of best foot forward. You need to feel good about them. So if you feel that there's a little bit wonky vertical lines, tricky issues like that. I do know a retoucher based in Gloucestershire who'd be very delighted to undertake that kind of work for you. Enough plug. Next slide, please, Julia. From a legal point of view, you do have to be quite careful about retouching, particularly if you are teaming up with a property developer and the property is for sale. You can't, for example, remove a damp stain on a ceiling if you're looking to sell the pictures. That's a legal issue. However, if they're for your portfolio or even for an editorial, then that sort of remedying and tweaking is perfectly allowable. Now, you might think, as part of your exorbitant photographic fee that you're paying for these pictures, shouldn't this retouching be included? Well, yes, one would expect a certain amount of what they call digital cleanup to be included in a quote. But a photographer has to be very careful about how much they commit to do that. You know, if they've shot 40 pictures in a day, and then they've got to go in and do some really serious retouching, that, of course, is going to add to the post-processing time. So I think a sort of common sense approach with digital retouching, if there are marks on walls, those are fairly straightforward to take care of. But if, for example, here, you actually felt like you wanted to swap out some artwork for something that was more reflective of your style, that's perhaps understandably taking people into extra territory. Bear in mind that your photographer is probably not totally enamored of spending hours behind the computer retouching. This may be work that they outsource, and ask them if they're happy to let you take their pictures to another retoucher. I'd like to think that in most cases the answer will be yes. The only thing they might stipulate is that you don't change the crops that they've provided. Cropping is actually a very creative decision and has a big bearing on how an image is received. So they may stipulate you can work on images to your heart's content, but keep the original crops because those are reflective of my compositions. Come in the next slide, please, Julia. So finally, displaying images on your website. And this slightly ties into where we started. When you were looking for a photographer and checking out their websites and their Instagram, your website has to function in a rather similar way to that of a photographer. Because if you think about it, when you come to a photographer, you're bringing them a project which hasn't yet been shot. You don't know really how this photographer is going to photograph your work. You're talking about a potential here. And in exactly the same way, when you're trying to invite potential clients to spend their money with you, you're inviting them to come and look at your website and look at previous projects that have been documented. And again, you're wanting them to look beyond the content to the how. They need to see, certainly, that you've got the range and that you've done XYZ projects that might align with their requirements. But you want them to see your vision, the vision at work that's intrinsically part of your design. That's what you bring to the party. And that's what your images have to communicate. So very often I see that sometimes websites, they're almost like a sort of almanac of completed projects. And really, I think you've got such a short time to make an impression that it's better to have a portfolio gallery of maybe 15 to 20 images that work across different projects that just speak of your style. You know, you may be very minimalist, or you may be very maximalist, or you may be big on color, or you may be great at sourcing artworks. I think the answer is whatever work you want to be known to be doing needs to be encapsulated in those 15 to 20 images. And again, going back to where we started, this is a conversation to have with your photographer when you're commissioning them, saying, this is what I'm about, this is my style, this is what I want to emerge with. So what I sometimes suggest to interior designers to do is to sit down and just write down some adjectives that describe your style, your vision. in a perfect world, what would you be known for? If you had the luxury of not having to say yes to every single job that comes along and just said, I just want to do this kind of work, which will be characterized by this feeling. Again, come up with a series of adjectives. Those adjectives will be the adjectives that ideally will resonate in the images that you commission from a photographer. And those pictures will be part of your key portfolio gallery on your website. So rather than, if people are sufficiently interested, they're going to look at other galleries, sure. But it's just that first 2 minutes that somebody's on your website. They've been on Instagram, they found you. If they got that interested to click through to the website, you've got to grab them then and there. And I would make it really easy for them to see that. Now, on a very rather sort of humdrum note, you'll probably have noticed in this presentation, a lot of the pictures are in portrait format. Again, that goes slightly back to the magazine thing, the A4 proportions. Do make sure that your website can accommodate both portrait and landscape images, because I think I would wager that the majority of your commissioned images are going to be in portrait format. And sometimes I've seen people spend a huge amount of money on a website and they couldn't display portrait format images. They're all geared up towards landscape. So rather boring point to end on. Just sort of keep that in mind. Do, in the same way that you're looking for coherence in your photographer's work, ensure that your website also reflects that similar coherence, that consistency of style, that almost postage stamp recognition, that branding that sets you apart from other people. Imagery can do that. It can communicate so much better than words in that respect. Can we have the next slide, please, Julia? So that's it. You'll be relieved to know. Sorry, I've talked for rather a long time. Before we go on to some questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. If you just want to talk about photography, I'm delighted to have a chat. All my details are on my website, cymexpics.com. And what I am offering now, of course, is the image retouching and optimization. If you've got shots of your own projects that you just want to give a little tweak to before you go to a wider audience, we can come up with lots of solutions for that. Or we can do more in-depth retouching of your existing images that you've had professionally shot. So I hope that was helpful. I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Hello, hi.
So go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for that. That was really, really informative. So thank you. Just in terms of, so if you've got a photographer's image that you're then going to repost on your social media, so where does the licensing work in that context? Obviously, if it's you've commissioned the photography and you've agreed that that's one thing.
Yeah.
But for argument's sake, let's say an architect commissioned the photography and they've agreed the license, but it's you're the designer and you're reposting those photographs that, let's say, the architect put it on their socials and you're reposting it. Is there any kind of licensing involved in that element?
Yes, I'm afraid if one's been good about this, if the architect's commissioned the shoot and you're wanting to repost, you are effectively working as you're deriving value from those pictures. They've become part of your marketing approach. So sadly, it's a case of back to the drawing board, which is why I think, collaborations are great. Shoot sharing is a great idea because you can have this conversation before it goes further out. But reposting on Instagram, I'm afraid, legally is a no-no. It happens, of course, but it's better. I mean, if your architect doesn't own the copyright to the images, so sadly they haven't got the authority to sort of say, well, XYZ parties can use the pictures. It does sadly have to be arranged via the photographer.
Because I'm just thinking that everyone seems to be reposting everything. So are most people just not kind of worrying? I mean, even reposting pictures of a magazine article, if who own, you know, who's
that's what I would do in that case. I don't think they can shoot you down in flames for producing some video. If you get the magazine, the physical magazine, and thumb through the pages and do a video of it, then you're showing this is where we were featured. If you were to take screenshots of the actual pictures and make that into a carousel, then that's a slightly different line. Is that
right? Okay, so yeah,
it's one way around it. You can just sort of say we're in the magazine this month, and here it is.
yeah.
It's just a bit of video.
It's still the photographer that owns that licensing. It's not the magazine.
The photographer owns the copyright, yeah, and not the magazine. There is, I mean, I think what's unfortunate is that magazines understandably want to have a certain exclusivity. They want to know that, you know, these images aren't going to appear elsewhere for a while, and they will ask for what they call an all rights arrangement, which really means there's a complete sort of media blanket on any other usage while that feature appears in the press. But until that, when that's up, then different arrangements can be made. But sometimes people get confused. They say, well, we want the copyright. What they're actually saying is we want an unlimited license to use, which is completely exclusive to us. So I'm saying, as an interior designer, I would hope that the license you arrange with a photographer is pretty encompassing, that really enables you to do just about whatever you want, perhaps with the exception of consumer titles, consumer editorial.
Great, thank you. I think it's just, yeah, I guess a lot of people on social media are permanently posting other people's work without necessarily crediting the designer. It might be even like an inspirational, I love this kitchen. And they don't necessarily credit, they may credit the place, the site where they found it from, but they're not necessarily crediting the original photographer that took it. So
yeah, and I'm afraid to just even a credit, I mean, again, this, I don't want to sound like, you know, Mr. Legal here, but a credit is not a form of remuneration.
right.
So even if a magazine or somebody on Instagram actually links through to the photographer's Insta feed, that's a legal requirement. It's acknowledging the copyright of the originating artist. But there's still, you could argue that if they're running a blog and there's advertising on the blog, they're still deriving value, and that value has to be remunerated somewhere. So I agree. It's a bit of an unpoliced area, the whole social media thing, and I'm not sure where the industry will go. But people do need to be careful. If they repost, they are theoretically opening themselves up to copyright infringement.
I mean, most people, I think, are happy about the reposting. It seems to be how it works. But at some point, someone wants to own something, I guess, whether it's the designer or the. You know.
I think maybe we move to a world where there is sort of like a two-tiered system, whereby you have sort of formal users of images that were produced in a photo shoot, you know, people who are going to use them on their website and in their brochures, etc., and the reposters. You know, there may just have to be a sort of B policy for Instagram reposting for sites such as you're talking about. You know, somebody who's just an enthusiast and said, "I love this interior designer's work." You know, that probably works productively for you as well. So yeah, maybe two tiers.
I guess as long as you get that credit, but yeah,
sure.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Naomi.
Hi, Simon. Thank you. It was
Naomi, hi.
interesting. So I've got a question, and I thought about it, and I think your second or third slide with the kimono hanging and the light fixture. Now, a lot of clients, certainly of mine, don't like their fixtures hung low, and I really do. So if you know, that would be something that you could retouch. You know, you could hang you could reposition the kimono lower and reposition the light fixture lower, right?
Yeah, That is possible. Yeah, that's perfectly possible. I'd say there have been some wonderful with AI. The world of retouching has been transformed, and I'll be totally honest. It is a lot easier to do many fixes, but conversely, it means that if you're not happy with an image, don't put up with second best. It's a good thing to, you know, if it doesn't have to cost what it used to fix problems.
So do you, oh, sorry to interrupt you.
So,
so do you charge per image, or do you, for retouching, do you charge per hour? How does it work?
I have an hourly rate and I quote. So I have an hourly basis. But if you're kind enough to send me a problem image, I'll always quote.
Don't tempt me.
So yeah, so that'll be great.
Okay, super.
I have to say, Simon helped me out with some AI produced imagery that, you know, that had floating chairs, or he put legs on things that didn't have legs, or and he's absolutely brilliant, really a delight to deal with. So highly recommended.
Thank you. Yes, Burning.
Do we have any other questions? I know we have somewhat run over, and a few
Sorry,
people...
I talk like a machine gun, I'm afraid.
No, not at all. But it was absolutely brilliant. I can't see any other questions at the moment. I did smile when you were talking about the challenge of the interior designer saying, oh, you know, while you're here, could you just, you know, maybe take some photographs of the bathroom, which is the issue we have with our clients when they say to us, oh, while you're here, would you just look at the bathroom? Or so we should understand. We should completely understand the photographer's perspective. So, Simon, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time and all the hard work that you've put into this, and for your wisdom, which I'm sure is going to be really beneficial to everybody who watches this webinar.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you all.
Cheers. Thanks,
Thank
Simon.
you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for
Yeah,
coordinating.
for organising.
Yeah, thank you, Julia.
Bye.
Bye.